Welcome to Modern Education, the show that dives into all things relevant to learning. Modern Education has a guest each week for an in-depth conversation about some aspects of teaching and learning. Join the host of Modern Education, Benjamin S. Woodford, as we continue to evolve the important topics for effective learning today. We will unpack the ways community members, students, teachers, parents, and researchers approach learning in all its forms. And now, introducing the host of Modern Education, Benjamin S. Woodford.
Hello, welcome back to the show. It's another Friday afternoon commute here on Modern Education at 90.1 KZSU. We're always happy to bring you new ideas in teaching, learning, parenting, and everything in between. When it comes to education, this is the place, Fridays at 3 on KZSU. Today in the studio, I've got Carrie Townley Flores. Carrie is going into her second year of a Ph.D. program at the School of Education here at Stanford. She lives on campus with her husband, along with her two boys, ages 16 months, and the oldest, who's 3 years old. She's the family chair of the Student Guild for the Graduate School of Education and has become familiar with the issues that student parents face on campus and has been working to advocate for those issues to help parents navigate grad school here at Stanford. I'm going to bring Carrie here on the line and say hello.
Hello.
Carrie, hey, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I've been really excited to get this interview down in the studio. So it's finally happened. We almost didn't even make it today, right?
Yeah, we had some things came up.
Yeah, it's funny because you're here to talk about parenting and taking care of parents on campus, and you actually almost weren't able to make it today because you were out taking care of a parent that you'd known from campus, right?
Yeah, I had a friend have a bit of an emergency, and so
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it worked out, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm also glad that you live what you preach, and you actually go out and try to help the people that you're serving in your more official kind of roles and things you're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just start. So you've been here for a little over a year, a little less than a year, somewhere in that range, right? Mm-hmm. And you came from somewhere else. So what were you doing before you came here, and what led you to show up on campus and take this new endeavor on?
Before I was at Stanford, I was a teacher, and I taught middle school and high school in Michigan and New Hampshire. And then I moved to Finland for 3 years for my husband's postdoc. And I taught second grade there. But I also had 2 children there. And my education experiences got me interested in disparities in education here in the U.S. And so I came back to Stanford to study that. And I brought my whole family with me.
Wow. So you moved out of the country to a presumably completely different, maybe culture shocking environment, and then you acclimated in this new area, right? What was it like there, and maybe in comparison to here? What are some of the things that stand out to you as different?
Well, in Finland, the first thing that you'll notice is the light is very different. Like the length of the days is much, much longer in the summer and much, much shorter in the winter. But the day-to-day things are also pretty different. The way that, especially once you have children, you start to notice that in Finland there are a lot of things set up to really take care of families and mothers and children, and they're sort of elevated to a position in society that's held with respect and care. That when we came back here, my biggest culture shock was that wasn't the case. In the U.S., like in Finland, you have a very long maternity leave that's protected, and your child has, childcare available, health care is available for everyone, pretty much. And like, if you need it, it's there. But here, when we came back, we found that wasn't the case.
Yeah. So you had your kids in another country. Are they still citizens?
No, Finland does not have reverse citizenship.
Okay, so they're American citizens.
Yes, they're American citizens.
Okay, so they were born there, had their early time and attention with you with a society that was really kind of set up for that, right? Mm-hmm. And then you came back here. Has it been more expensive for you here versus there?
Wildly more expensive to have kids here. Yes.
Really? Why?
Well, in Finland, for instance, healthcare is it's not free because everyone sort of pitches in and pays for it. But for individuals, you don't end up paying out of pocket a whole lot for healthcare. Here we pay $800 a month. When you have kids, daycare in Finland is 300 euros a month, and here we're paying $2,000 a month per child. And then rent, like just the affordability in the area is much more expensive than it is in Helsinki. We were paying about $1,000 a month in Finland, and here we pay twice that, wow, for a similar place.
Yeah, so it's not only that the culture is completely different, but you're also noticing that there is these structural sort of government mandates in Finland were really useful and actually mattered to your existence, so to speak.
Sure.
Yeah. So, okay, so you have a lot of things on your plate right now. You have 2 young kids. You have a husband that you need to maintain a relationship with. You have research and all these other sort of responsibilities on campus, right? Mm-hmm. Is childcare an option for you?
What do you mean by that?
Could you just not have childcare and still get all the things you need done?
No, definitely not. My husband would have to be a stay-at-home parent or something. You'd have to have something.
Right. So this is an instrumental part of you being a productive member of society, is having childcare that's reliable and accessible and all that, right?
Everyone has to figure something out, sure.
Yeah. So we're just kind of trying to set the stage a little bit here for what students have to deal with when they're coming into an environment like this. It's very fast-paced, very competitive, right? We have a lot of things happening. How do you manage juggling all these different roles? It's got to be a lot, right?
Sure. Everyone who I know who's a graduate student parent kind of figures out some kind of support system. And a lot of times it's fellow graduate student parents who understand, or family members. We're fortunate enough to have a lot of family in the area.
Yeah.
That's a big help. My husband is completely instrumental. He's very, very supportive, but he also works full time. And so we figured out a childcare situation, but that's not easy for everyone to figure out either.
Right. I'm imagining you have a partner, and that's a great thing, and it always makes raising parents easier. Have you got a sense of maybe some different struggles that single parents end up having to go through, or have you talked to some single parents, and can you give us a little idea of how that might be different or harder, or different supports that might be available for someone who needs more help?
Sure. I can't say I know of more supports that are available. I do know it's incredibly difficult, and all the more so if you're, on your own. I know here, among the grad student parents that I know, we've formed sort of a tight community together, and sort of because we have to, but also because we want to, and so we support each other. But yeah, if you don't have your partner and you don't have a partner with you and you're on your own, that makes it all the harder.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where if it's obviously a harder situation, why isn't there extra supports, right? It's obvious if you have half the income of a 2-parent working family, there should be maybe twice the support for that type of thing. And I don't know I don't sound like you're not aware of at least anything specific for that, right?
Not anything that's set aside especially for single parents.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, I'm really curious about some of the work you've been doing with the Student Guild and with just organizations on campus around parenting things. I know there's been some cool stuff going on. Can you give us a couple of the tidbits of what you've been doing, or kind of some of the initiatives that have been talked about at least? Sure.
So a lot of the work that I've done, I've definitely got to make a big shout out to Tina Chuk, and she started a few years ago. She's a graduate student here as well, and she started a few years ago doing a lot of advocacy around these same issues, because when she had her firstborn, she did not feel that there was virtually any support, and she put together organizations like Mothers in Academia, Student Parent Alliance, and these are places where I've found a home for myself as well. Where we get together and we support each other, but we
Can
also
you tell me about those? So Mothers in Academia, what is that? What is the sort of goal, or how does that work as far as meetings or whatever?
So it's not super formal, but once a quarter, Tina arranges a luncheon and we get together and just, get to be in the same room as other people going through the same things as we are. And it's not just for moms. I mean, it was originally for moms, but there are definitely dads who participate. And it's also not just for grad students, it's for postdocs. And there are some professors as well who've shown up. And we just, we get to talk to people who are going through the same things that we're going through and who understand what we're going through. And that's really great. And through that, we can network but we also work together and we'll go, we have participated in some town hall meetings and done other things to raise awareness about the issues that we're dealing with.
Right. And do you find that just having that community and the place to sit with people maybe who have similar struggles or similar endeavors they're going through is helpful?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah. How so?
It's helpful because we share resources. First of all, it's hard when you first get to campus to know what you need and to know what's out there. And so it's through those meetings that you find out about, the listserv that you have to be on. It's called Parent Net Request. You should get on it if you need it. And then there's, you find out about, there's this money is available if you can apply for it. And, this daycare is opening up. And, I need a nanny share. And, you can just, that's how you, will find your way around campus, around all the things that you need.
Yeah. And it's such an important piece of the experience, I'd say on campus, but I think it's probably a much more universal thing about having the chance to have these conversations with people in similar situations and having the chance to just sort of share your struggles a little bit, because once you start talking about them, people have resources, people have ideas, people have, I dealt with that too, and here's what I did. And you're not going to get that sitting at the tailgate that's going on right now for the football game, right? It's a different type of conversation.
Big time. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So what else have you been working on? So you've been working with these parent networks. I remember there was something about changing stations. Was there an initiative you worked on with that, or?
So the Dean Dan Schwartz of the Graduate School of Education granted me a meeting after I had done a couple surveys of people, of graduate student parents at the School of Education. And he wanted to hear what we had, what were the findings of that, of those surveys. And, parents had very similar needs. A lot of them had to do with financial need. That's the biggest one. And then childcare access. But then there were also a lot of incidental things, like longer maternity leave or these changing tables, for instance, that just make that create a space for parents in the graduate student world. So we have a lot of events on campus for the Grad School of Education, and we like to say that families are invited and that kind of thing. But when there aren't changing tables, that just makes one more barrier for parents. And so after this meeting that I had with Dean Dan, where I brought this up, he said, absolutely, let's do it. And during our meeting, we even went and talked to some people who are in charge of these things, and they got the ball rolling. And so they built some changing tables in a couple of the education buildings on campus, which was just a great symbolic gesture that they're trying to make more space for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love how you called it a symbolic gesture, because it's clearly not, changing the entire world that you have to live in or the different things that are available per se, but it shows an effort towards a sort of value system, right? We're doing something and moving in that direction.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And Dean Schwartz, we're going to shout out Dean Schwartz all day long. He was so great. He's come on the show before, and he's always got great input on just about everything. We love you, Dean Schwartz. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Moving on from that. I'm not kissing up. I mean it. Okay. So you've been working on supporting parents. Isn't there a fund or something for parents on campus?
So there has been historically a fund that was put together by some donors who had been graduate student parents themselves, and it was for specifically for parents who lived in Escondido Village who had 2 kids or more, and that serves. And it was you had to apply for it, and it was need based and everything, but that was for a very particular group of student parents. So this year, we've been advocating for more financial support as well as childcare support for parents, and the university has put together a grant that's more overarching, that's for all student parents. So it's still only for graduate students. It's not for postdocs yet, but by September 15th, you can apply. If you haven't yet, do it. But you can apply for this up to $10,000 grant for if you have any kind of child dependence.
Okay, what's it called?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's called the Graduate Student Parent Grant, but I'm not exactly sure.
Well, maybe those would be good Google terms at the very least, right?
Yes.
We don't need specific names because we have the Google. It can do all of this for us. Okay.
Yes.
So this fund is available. You said it's about $10,000 is available per family. Is that per year or one time or?
It's a pilot. This is the pilot year. So we'll see how it goes. But they said it's progressive, and they will grant from $1,000 to up to $10,000 awards. I think the cap is a household income of $125,000. So if you're eligible, so pretty much if you're under that, they're going to try to get you some funding to help out with childcare needs.
Okay, and that's huge, right? I mean, this is progress moving in the right direction. This is what you're hoping for, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a huge gesture. This is going to be incredibly helpful for some families who maybe they have two graduate student parents or a stay-at-home parent and a graduate student parent. They have just incredible need. And so this will definitely help.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just put into context how much $10,000 is within the peninsula area, right? Is that maybe 2 months worth of rent?
I mean, it's probably about a little less than 5 months rent.
Okay.
Or
on campus.
On campus. Okay. So yeah, on campus is subsidized. So on campus, a 2-bedroom apartment is about $2,000 per family. So so $10,000 would cover about 5 months or 5 months of daycare.
Right.
For one child.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that daycare is about $2,000 a month. Is that roughly correct?
Approximately, yes.
Is that for both your kids or just a single child? Or
that's for the younger child. So for the older child, it's about $1,700 a month.
Wait, you're paying both of those? Mm-hmm. That's almost $4,000.
Yes, it is.
I mean, I feel like this is like a joke, and you're just kidding, right?
No, and while the Bay Area has a lot of affordability issues with housing, the daycare prices, those are prices that you'll see elsewhere as well.
Really? So this is not just a Peninsula, Silicon Valley cost estimate, right? This is going to be maybe not representative, but close wherever you're going.
Especially in a lot of urban areas, sure.
Yeah. Okay. To me, that seems unmanageable for anyone making a regular mortal salary, right? I mean, rent in this area, subsidized $2,000, unsubsidized is, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month. And then childcare ranging between $2,000 and $4,000 for 1 to 2 kids. I mean, a lot of people don't make that much money in 6 months.
Right. People in this area have found a lot of different ways to deal with that. So if you're making under $100,000, you can be considered locally low income here. But because you're so far above the federal poverty guidelines, you often don't qualify for a lot of subsidy or a lot of support, governmentally. And even if you do qualify, you won't necessarily get that support that you need. So people find all kinds of ways to deal with that. So with childcare, a lot of people, need, have nanny shares, or they try to cut their hours at work or make their hours more flexible so that they can be home more. People do all kinds of things to make it work.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of the time when I was teaching in high school. I was a college graduate making a presumably professional wage salary as a teacher, and I still qualified for low-income housing. And it's like, that's a problem as far as I'm concerned. If you're in education and you're serving your community, you should be able to live in that same community. And this is one of these things where it just pops up everywhere. And I'm bringing this up because we had spoken about the difficulties that the people who work in the childcare area where you bring your kids have with that same kind of dynamic.
Yes, definitely. The affordability issues that are endemic of Silicon Valley definitely affect all of our teachers, including our early childhood teachers. Absolutely.
Right.
It makes it hard for them to live here, and then if they're commuting, it makes their day very, very long.
Right. And these teachers are, in some way, they're kind of part of your family, right? Because they're helping raise your kids and they're there with them in all these days and very consistently part of their lives.
Absolutely.
How does it feel to you knowing that they're not even able to live in the same town or support themselves in a meaningful way while they're making commute probably and taking care of your kids? What do you wish you could do for them if you could make a difference?
Oh man, I mean, yes, like you said, they feel like they're part of your family. They are helping you raise your kids. It is something that I would love to help. I would love to do more to help the early childhood teachers that my kids have. There's actually at my children's daycare, there is an affordability task force right now that I'm on, where we're going to be looking at these exact issues and trying to see if there's any way we can pull some kind of strings and help with things like housing and commute and these other day-to-day issues that make life hard on, some of the people who care for our kids the most.
Yeah, absolutely. That seems like a pretty big undertaking to try to address that, because where do you even start? Where do you even think about this? This is such a multifaceted situation where it's like you guys are all paying in to help pay these teachers, and then these teachers are coming and getting paid, but there's still not enough on either end, and everybody's giving too much in that process. Where do you even begin to approach a solution to something like that?
That's a great question. I mean, these kinds of issues are also on Stanford University's radar, so they have their own affordability task force right now, where they're looking at housing issues, they're looking at childcare issues, they're looking at all kinds of things as well. So they're willing to be some kind of resource for us. We're looking at things like, fundraising. We're looking at partnerships that we can potentially make with connections that we can have in this area to make some of these things more affordable. We're going to throw everything at the wall.
See what sticks, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think Stanford really does have the best intentions with helping make these things happen. And it seems to me everybody who speaks up and seeks out some kind of help at least gets good responses and tries to move it in the right direction. I don't know if it always pans out or if, Stanford always follows through on everything, but it seems like there is a desire to make things equitable on campus and to make things possible for people. What's your impression, having maybe be a little closer to that?
I mean, definitely when we have asked for platforms on which to speak and people to speak to, people come and listen. Like administrators have come and listened to our stories as graduate student parents. When I say our, that's the group I mean, but right. They've come to listen to the graduate student parents' needs a handful of times, and like I said, they've had a couple task forces in the last year, and then they have one ongoing, looking at specifically at parent issues, and they're comparing, what Stanford offers to what other schools offer, and through those efforts is part of what the Stanford Graduate Fund, the Graduate Family Fund, came from. So yes, there are definitely people on campus who are in administrative positions who really care and are trying to figure out what to do that's best.
Right. And students like yourself and others who also care and are willing to make those conversations get started, which is the only way it'll ever happen, right? Nobody's trying to give away extra money to make people's lives easier. So I wanted to talk, you mentioned a little while ago about just parental leave or maternal or paternal leave, right? What is the situation for a student who is in the midst of having a child on campus? As far as referring to leave and their ability to have a little flexibility around that.
Sure. So Stanford, I believe, as there are different. So there's either university policies, and then there are school level policies, and there are several different graduate schools, that each have their own sort of systems, and then there are a lot of unspoken policies. Okay.
So fill us in on some of those, the layers.
Yeah,
like an onion.
All right, I'll try. I'll try. So at Stanford level, they will, you'll be a protected student for, I think you can take up to at least a year leave. Okay. But if you do take that year leave, you will get to come back to your position, but you may lose. In the meantime, you won't have, the benefits of the housing, which is subsidized, and the, subsidized healthcare and all these other things. So, so that's sort of at the university level. And then under that, I'm not exactly sure where one ends and one begins, but I know at least at the Graduate School of Education, we have 1 quarter of leave where you're protected for, that's considered your maternity leave. And in the written policy, it says it starts, the quarter that you have your child. So it's not clear in the written policy what happens when you have a child in week, 8 of the quarter versus week 2 in the quarter. How does your experience could be very different depending on when exactly you have your children. But then they protect also your pay for about 6 weeks during, in the written policy, it says it's for the quarter that you have your child, and they'll give you, say if you're under an RA ship, you'll still get your pay for, or a TA ship, you'll still get your pay for 6 weeks if you're not, in the classroom working during the quarter in which you have your child. And so we've been talking to some people on potentially extending that, because that's pretty tight and it's not exactly clear when that starts. Does that start in the written policy? It does not start at birth. It starts during the quarter in which you give birth. So it's not necessarily the most helpful for parents, but unspoken as well. Parents have told me that they've been able to be very flexible depending on their advisor and the people they work with. So they're able to get a little bit more time potentially.
Okay, so let me just see if I can recap here. So officially, it's possible to take up to a year leave school-wide. Is that, do you know if that's just for grad students or that applies to undergrads as well? Or
I'm not exactly sure the difference for undergrad
People
students.
People can Google that too. But so you can take up to a year off, but you may lose your housing placement, which is a big deal around here, right? Because if you lose your housing placement and then you don't find subsidized housing again, you could be completely impossible to actually live here, commuting for hours to actually make it to campus, right? Okay, and then if you're in the grad school of education, at the very least, we know there is a 6-week sort of fuzzy deadline on when you can take time off.
Yes, basically.
Sort of loosely centered around your kid's birth in the quarter or whatever that means, which we're not quite sure, right? So sometimes maybe that loose language can be really helpful and serve the students. Maybe it can be reinterpreted as necessary, and sometimes it can serve, I don't know, in this particular case, if that's serving to make things a little more flexible. Do you have any sense of if they're more lenient with that because the language is imprecise, or is it more... it errs on the side of not helping you more?
So my impression from talking to a number of students and even an administrator is that in general, first of all, this doesn't come up very often because given the grad student population, not many of us are having children during grad school. But when people do, there's a lot of, work it out with the people that you work with. And so it's, typically most of the burden naturally, physically falls upon the mother. So the mother who's about to have a child goes and talks to her advisor, talks to her team, and figures it out. And everyone sort of figures this out individually. And that's sort of been the impression that I've gotten from other graduate students who have had kids here. And the policy, Dean Dan brought this up, that the policy is necessarily fuzzy because if you have a policy written down that is hard-lined, then you have to hold people to it and you have to enforce it. And they err on the side of not writing down things that they would have to later enforce. Like he says, he would rather spend efforts, arbitrating these conversations rather than trying to come up with a blanket, very hard-line policy. And his impression is that people are generally flexible. And my impression from mothers is that it has been the case that people have been flexible with them, but it's also put a lot of stress on them that they do have to go out of their own way to have these conversations themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that can be a really good thing to not lock ourselves into a bureaucracy decision that isn't considering the people involved, right? So sounds like maybe that was what they were going for with that sort of gray area, which can be good. What about for men? Do you think there's a stigma between the maternity and paternity leave issues, or is the same thing applicable to both genders? Or maybe non-binary genders as well?
Sure. So I think, definitely, and historically there has been some kind of stigma about paternity leave, and it's sort of seen as less of a priority than maternity leave, in part because maternity leave has been considered like a disability leave, and it's very like in a lot of legal language, it's very tied to the physical act of giving birth rather than the social emotional connection that you're making with your child, and the bonding and just the hard work of being up all night and
Right.
raising this very, very tiny baby who doesn't even have a circadian rhythm yet. So because the language in a lot of policies is tied to the physical act of giving birth, a lot of policies do not even look at fathers. Now I think that tide is kind of shifting, and a lot of companies are getting on board with paternity leave as well as maternity leave, or anything in between. But there's and right now people are definitely bringing that to the table whenever we're having these conversations.
Oh, good. Yeah, you had a really, to me, a poignant short story about what you witnessed with a father, I believe it was, who was having a child maybe on the same day as an important sort of benchmark.
Oh,
what happened there?
Yeah, I had a friend who recently told me a story about how his child was actually coming into this world on the same day that he had to sit for some exams, and he told his professors, my wife is giving birth, and they said, okay, well, we'll give you 24 hours. And so 24 hours later, he took these exams. And
oh my gosh!
More power to him, but that's rough.
That is so rough. But I think it also is sort of representative of the way we treat men when it comes to having children. Like, oh, you didn't give birth, just get back to work. Right. And I think personally, as just being a man, if my wife had just had a kid, I would want to take a few days off of work, maybe a few weeks or longer, or maybe I'd want to go back to work right away and get away from the crying baby. I don't know. I haven't gotten there yet. But I can imagine just, hypothetically, it seems like having a little bit of understanding and compassion for that, and knowing like maybe you want to hold your newborn child for a few days before you come back and deal with these sort of life-changing trajectory moments in school. I guess where I'm going with this is just what is your sense of the ethic or the ethos around what parenting means when you're a grad student? Is it just like, oh, you're a parent, we got your back? Or is it more like, you're a parent, good luck, figure it out?
I think,
or somewhere in between.
I think it's somewhere in between. It depends on what crowd you're talking to. Certainly with professors when they're teaching, I've found a lot of them to be very flexible, and I always encourage my friends who are dealing with parent issues to talk to their professors, and professors in every instance that I've heard about. Of course, that's only my people who have talked to me about it, but professors have been flexible and given given extended deadlines and that kind of thing. And a lot of grad student parents, they take an extra year, and so they're here for 6 years instead of 5, but otherwise it doesn't really hurt them very much in that regard. I haven't heard of a lot of discrimination specifically. I don't know that people are really going out of their way to support grad student parents a lot, but certainly when issues do come up, they're treated with some level of understanding. That's sort of been my impression.
Yeah, that's really great. And, you've mentioned something a couple of times now that I have to go back and revisit, but it's this idea of the personal working it out and the personal connection, and being able to, talk with your advisors or talk with, your higher ups. And if you're not in an educational setting, but these ideas I think can apply in other settings, it's, sharing your story, letting people know what's happening and what you need. How important has that been for you in this process of acclimating here?
Do you mean when you're trying to get something, or just in terms of just sharing your story with people?
I mean, where you want to take it, really. I think both would be interesting for me.
Oh, sure. Okay, well, just on the more the personal sort of day-to-day sharing of the story, I think it's incredibly important to share with people. I mean, a lot of us like to process big things in our lives by sharing them with the people around us. And I know when I first came to Stanford, I was actually considering, how much am I going to need to hide the fact that I'm a, student parent? Are people, there are already biases against women? Are there going to be more biases against me because I'm a mother, or is that going to be a strength? And I thought about actually hiding that fact. And I even Skyped with another grad student early on, right after I was accepted, and I kept the camera up so she didn't see my very pregnant belly because I was about to have my second baby. And looking back, I didn't hide it for 5 minutes. Once I got here, I became the family chair of the student guild before school started. And it just sort of became this almost a platform that I've stood on rather than something I've hidden, which I'm really glad for. I love talking about that aspect of my life. So.
Right. Yeah. And we love hearing you talk about it. That's why you're here. And you bring up something really interesting, just the possibility of stigma and the sort of perception of what people may think. That can be a real thing, right? It's not just some like, oh, you felt weird or whatever. Like, it can be daunting moving into a new place and not knowing how things are going to be received, or institutionally how well things will be able to protect you or provide just needs being met. Mm-hmm. And this is another thing where it's like having the clear communication and giving resources and a heads up before people show up can alleviate a huge amount of that anxiety going into a new space. I mean, I know for me, I have a disability, and I'm always wondering, okay, is this going to be accessible if I show up to this event, right? And it's such an easy thing for someone to just call up and be like, hey, it's good. There's no stairs or whatever, right? I mean, it's funny, right? Because there's stairs coming into the studio here. Right. But I mean, I'm just kind of trying to relate that feeling of having a new life move coming up and not knowing what to expect and not knowing how much of yourself to bring to that versus how much of yourself needs to kind of stay at home and be professional or whatever. Right, exactly. And I think I don't want to make it sound all rosy. I think there is still a long ways to go. And I actually I was at a conference here, and a male professor was up giving his talk. And right before his talk, he showed a picture of him, playing with his kids, and talked about that for a second. And the professor who was sitting next to me leaned over and said he didn't think that was appropriate because his opinion was that if a female professor had done the same thing, the crowd wouldn't have had as receptive of a response, and that it would have actually created more bias against her. He actually said that. And and I don't know how I feel about that particular thing. I want to see all the kids, all the babies, show the pictures. Right. But it's a good point. I mean, if that could potentially add to bias against you. I think in the School of Education, there are a lot of student parents, and I think it's a pretty welcoming place for student parents. And I would like to encourage new students who are coming in to introduce themselves to me, and I want to share, and to other people as parents, and let us know. And we want to get kids involved in events, but that is still a scary thing for people. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking about what the professor was saying, and like, wow, I'm a little conflicted there because I love kids, and I think everyone should be proud to just share their kids anytime. And for me, when you see a new speaker, you want to know a little bit about them as a person, right? Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, I actually also feel like I agree with this idea of why should it be okay for men to do the same thing that a woman would get maybe chastised for, right? But I don't know. There's no easy answer there. It's definitely a thought-provoking question, though. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what the right answer is for that one. Yeah, I think in the social sciences, it's almost never a right answer. There can be multiple right answers. So. That's true. It's not as cut and dry as mathematics. Oh, I miss my mathematics. Nah, there's plenty of not cut and dry things there, too. Okay, so I want to transition a little bit here. Okay. What is your favorite part about having your kids with you here on campus? What is what you look forward to? What gets you going when it comes to your kids and work and all this? Oh, I love my kids. I love all the time I get to spend with them. And I love that on campus, I'm in family student housing. Mm-hmm. And so we are set up in courtyards. In the middle of the courtyard is a very nice playground with a big sandbox and a big play area. And
on the weekends, the kids wake up and they just want to play outside. That's all they want to do. And so we can just go right outside, and there's this huge playground with all these friends. And I really love that about how things are set up here.
Oh, that sounds great. Or you ever find yourself sitting in your office working, just longing to be back with them and give them little cuddles and stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Especially now that it's summer and things are a little more laid back, I've definitely left early and just gone and picked up my kids, a little bit early so I can play with them a little bit more.
Yeah. And are they having friends in the area that are similar ages? Are you able to have play dates and things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, usually our play dates are more spontaneous, just with kids who live in the courtyard, but a number of the kids in the courtyard also go to their daycare. And so, they have these, because their daycare is on campus, because we're very lucky to be in that situation. So they definitely have built-in friends.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And I'm imagining then, since they maybe go to daycare together and then maybe live close by, they see their friends after school, or is that a reality for you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. For us, that's a reality.
And it seems also, I've noticed Stanford seems to be very thoughtful about how they place you and the way your living situation is, right? You live in a courtyard with a bunch of other families, right? Mm-hmm. I live on a hallway with a whole bunch of other non-childbearing couples, right? Uh-huh. And so we have this sort of like a little bit of community just in a similar situational areas. So I think that's a really great piece of this, isn't it?
Yeah, that is definitely.
Okay, so we talked about the best part. What's the hardest part for you?
The hardest part about having our kids here is probably the cost. I think financially it has been quite a surprise coming back here to Silicon Valley. And I think that's something I hear from a lot of graduate student parents. We already talked about the costs of things, $2,000 per month per kid for daycare, $2,000 for rent and so forth. And we're lucky ones who got a spot in the daycare. A lot of people have a commute where they have to take their kids, to some other daycare, or they have, there are a lot of other different situations people have set up for childcare. But regardless, it's extremely expensive, and affordability is a big issue. And our graduate student stipends are extremely generous for graduate school, if you just look at graduate schools across the board.
Right.
But I think the average stipend is about $30,000. But in this area, that's a drop in the bucket, and it disappears pretty fast.
Right. Absolutely. So if modern education could just write a ticket or a check for every family that needed it, what would be a sort of realistic number to make that burden not be?
I think relieving the childcare costs. I think if I had to come up with some kind of fantastic / realistic check you could write, it would be to cover childcare costs for families. And I think it's typically around $24,000 per kid, maybe a little bit less. And then, and because even parents who have older children, they're still paying a lot for childcare because of after school hours and that kind of thing. Right.
So it look somewhere in the range of 20 to 50 grand.
Oh yeah. That would definitely relieve some burden there.
Okay. Well, when modern education gets to the point where they can do that for the community, we will definitely be revisiting this conversation.
Oh, fantastic.
I don't know when that's going to happen, but we can always plan, right? Okay. Now, we are getting close to running out of time. So I wanted to ask you, if I could hand you a magic wand right now, and you could address maybe the top 3 things, we're going to say besides funding, you could just wave this magic wand and just change the structural, cultural, societal, anything you want. Where would you wave that wand? In what direction?
I would add more hours to the day, as a graduate student and a new researcher, I want to get my hands involved in every project I can. And as a mom, I want to be there for every moment that I can. And that's the constant balance, that you're doing. Wow. So I would have more time with my kids and more time for everything else. So definitely time would be the first one.
Oh, that's inspiring, because you're not saying I'd like to take something off my plate. You're not saying, I'd like to make my life easier. You're just saying, I just would like more hours in the day so I can keep going with all these wonderful things that I feel lucky to be involved with.
Absolutely.
And to me, that's like such a beautiful way of putting it, and such a clear, speaks so clearly to who you are and to, the work ethic of someone who's doing so many different things and wearing so many different hats. It's not about getting out of the work. You would gladly take on more, I would imagine. But just having more hours in the day and maybe a little more funding to be able to do it all, that's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, maybe 2 others. If you can top that, great. If not, you already did it. So it's all good.
Well, I think that would cover just about everything. But I guess another wand would be I'd make logistics easier for other people, because I think I mentioned that I'm really lucky that I got into this childcare, but there are about the same number of grad students who are served by the childcare systems on campus are also about the same number of grad students are also on the wait lists waiting for their kids to get a spot. And so those parents are in limbo where they want their kids in a childcare center, but they don't have that. So they might find nannies. There are many wonderful nannies who are working on campus with our kids, and people have been extremely happy with that situation. So not everyone needs a childcare center, but some people want that for one reason or another, and they don't have access to that. So my other wand would be create all of this access, and that would be great.
Oh, wow. You did top the first one. Now it's a selfless gesture with your magic wand to make childcare accessible for people who need it, right? It's kind of staggering that half the students with kids are able to take advantage or utilize the childcare, but the other half aren't. That's 50%. I mean, those aren't good odds, right?
I mean, I would say, I don't know if it's 50% of student parents, but 50% of parents who want
the ones that apply.
Who apply, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, there is a new daycare center that's being built on campus that will house I think it has 80 more seats than are currently available. And the university does have some efforts right now to partner with some other childcare facilities in, I think, Redwood City and around Palo Alto and in different places, trying to work on that burden. It is on the university's radar for sure, but it's been an issue for a lot of parents.
Yeah. And, I'm just thinking from a gambling perspective. I'm a mathematician, right? I'm thinking about the probability of 50% once you apply of even getting in. I would imagine there's a lot of parents who don't even apply because they realize their odds are so low of actually getting in, and then they'd be just sitting in limbo waiting on a waiting list trying to find out what's happening. Right.
And, the other issue is the expense. Like, a lot of parents just say, well, I can't afford it anyway, so I won't apply. But the waiting lists, I guess on average, people wait 12 to 18 months to get on, to get a spot. And right now I have several friends who have one child in a daycare center and the other child hasn't gotten in yet, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really tough, because then you have this kind of divided way of dealing with your entire family, and that's tough, I'm sure, for anybody to juggle.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
absolutely. And then again, just applying to put your 18-month-old in school, you may have a 3-year-old by the time they get into childcare, right?
Right. Yeah, and that happens. I mean, people will apply when they find out that they're pregnant, and their child will not get in until they're 9 months old or something.
Wow.
But workplaces aren't usually that accommodating with 9-month maternity leave, so you have to figure something out in between.
Right, absolutely. And it's such a difficult thing because we are in such a high-paced, fast-paced, high-pressure environment. Taking some of that uncertainty off the table is such a huge thing for parents who they just want to focus on their studies. They just want to make something for a future for themselves and their family and whatever causes they're working on. There's a lot of causes on this campus, which I love, by the way. Everybody wants to change the world, and that's such a great thing. But yeah, I mean, that uncertainty must be such a difficult thing to be in sort of limbo for so long. And I'm imagining just being able to take that uncertainty off the plate of a parent who's already got so much on their plate would be such a huge thing.
Absolutely. I know the summer before we came here, that was the biggest stressor for me. We were moving internationally, and we had the 2 kids, and we were, living here and living there. And but we didn't know until right before we got in that we were going to have spots for our kids. And so we were talking to people, trying to set up nannies and trying to do different things just in case, the school year started and we didn't have daycare yet. It was extremely stressful and such a relief when we found out we got in.
Right. Absolutely. I'm glad that was able to work out for you. I wish it was true for everybody, but at least present company has gotten what she needed, and so that's good.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like a liaison or somebody who had maybe reached out to you ahead of time time and helped you facilitate that would have helped lower the affect in that situation?
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
If, the way that a lot of graduate student parents and the way that I, figured things out was just through conversations with other graduate students. So I had a Skype conversation with another graduate student parent right before I accepted coming, and they said, if you accept to come immediately after a conversation, get on the wait list. And that is what I did that day.
Wow. So
Yeah.
you got lucky because you got to have that conversation early, right?
Yes.
And so maybe a small structural outreach to be able to facilitate or supply that information earlier and more systematically would be a useful step.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. This has actually come up across a lot of different jobs, like teachers, for instance. They have so many other things going on, and it could be such an easier and happy place if we just had that little bit of extra support, little bit of extra information, a little bit of support staff, right? And it seems like a simple thing. Hire one extra person and have them address parenting, incoming parents and things like that, right?
Yeah, and that was actually something that we've pushed for a lot in our advocacy work this year, and they're working on getting someone to be that point person. I think they're actively trying to do that right now.
That's amazing. Thank you for all the work you're doing for parents on campus.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming in and sharing all these ideas with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such an honor and so much fun to be on your
absolutely.
show.
The honor was mine, and I really am so happy that we got to have this conversation. I'm happy that you were able to make it today, and I hope any parents that are listening or soon to be parents listening who may have gotten something from this or have extra questions can reach out. I'm sure I could put you in contact with Carrie if you don't find her info directly. And this is Modern Education. So thank you for tuning in. We're here every Friday at 3 o'clock for your commute home. And we are always bringing you new, fresh ideas, interviews, and time to reflect on the educational process, both in the Bay and elsewhere. This is Modern Education. I'm Ben Woodford, signing off.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. To revisit the content from today's show or hear previous episodes, you can find us on YouTube and Facebook by searching for Modern Education. Make sure to come back next week as we continue the conversation and visit new topics connected to learning in all its modern form. The show is written, produced, and hosted by Benjamin S. Woodford. I'm the announcer, Darlene Franklin, and this has been a production of 90.1 KZSU Stanford. See you next week for more Modern Education.
This is a test of the emergency alert system. This is only a test.